Next job. While I was doing the back end here, I decided to pull the mat out, which is the original mat, 50 years old, and of course the floor was all, the paint was all flaky, so I scraped it all out and we're back to sort of pretty much bare metal, and there are rust spots all over it, so I've given the whole thing a coat with some phosphoric acid, and because it was really bad. And then what I'm going to do now is scrub it out with some vinegar, sort of part, maybe three parts water, 1 part vinegar, and just give it a scrub out. It'll all turn yellow, and then I'll just wipe the whole thing off with some water to get rid of the remaining bits. And you can see I've left the phosphoric acid on overnight, and it sort of bubbles up the rust. So when I scrape that, it'll just come off. And then what I've got some holes, pinhole rust in a few spots. And what I'm going to do is use my spot weld drill, like I did with the tunnel on the floor, to drill them out, and then drill out the same on a fresh piece of metal. So I have some little plugs that I can go around and plug the floor and weld it. You can see this bulkhead section here. Well, underneath that floor I can access all of that, so anything that I weld there I'll be able to actually clean up underneath and seal so that it doesn't rust again. And once this is all done and scraped back, you can see here where on the side here, that's where I was panel beating it to fix the side of the car that was dented. So once this is done, I'll give it an epoxy coat and seal it up. And I'm also going to, I've already done it here, I've used some sealer to seal down on the side there, the quarter panels, so that water can't get down there again. And I'll do the same on this side. I also have to make one of these little cable tunnels here, because the one on this side was completely rusted away. And yeah, give it a clean up inside. I might even give the roof a bit of a scrub as well, and give the inside a paint so it looks all fresh. It's pretty easy going, and I'm just wondering what to do with the floor here, if I should go back to the original colour or whether I should put some kind of texturized coating down. And I've been reading a lot about the coatings, and a lot of people use bed liner inside their car, but that's a really bad idea because they contain polyurethane, which is poisonous. Even after it dries, the fumes are still carcinogenic, and it's been linked to lung tumours, cancers, all different stuff. It's terrible, and you can actually read about it even on their safety disclosure sheet that they have with the product, that it does that. So it's only meant for external use, so you can't use it in a cabin where you're breathing it all the time. But there is another product called Lizard Skin that's quite expensive, but they make a sound deadener paint, but they also make a ceramic coating as well, so the two together is supposed to be really good for both noise and for thermal insulation as well. I'm not worried about thermal insulation because I'm not using it as a regular driver, but the other stuff, the sound deadener, could be good, and it also gives a really good coating. The other way of going is I could actually just use a roller and some seam sealer and just seam seal the whole thing on the floor, because this would actually seal any of the pinholes that are left that I don't get to, and also give quite a tough coating. So yes, and there's also some sound deadener that I have as well. So combination of those two, and then I'm going to put a carpet over the top anyway, so it doesn't need to be original colour. I just thought it would be nice. If I went the deadener paint, then you can actually overpaint that. So once it's dry, I could give it another coat with some epoxy, which would give me a nice surface to paint on, and then I would put my original colour on top of it, which is the 10,081 code paint called Malmo, which is only 67, 68. And then on top of that I'd do like a gloss acrylic lacquer, several coats, or even some floor lacquer, if I can get one that's non-toxic, to seal it up to make a really strong surface. So we'll see how we go. First things first. So I've just covered the floor in some vinegar and water, and it's all wet. You can already see it starting to turn yellow, so we'll give it about half an hour and I'll report back and show you how it's going. You've got to love something that you can have on your chips and your You've got to love something you can have on your chips and your mini floor. So I've just scrubbed a little bit for a couple of minutes with some steel wool and the vinegar mix, and we're going to leave it for half an hour and see what happens. It'll all turn yellow and then we'll wipe off the yellow, and we should have a nice shiny finish. You've got to love something that's safe on your chips and your mini floor. Here's the back after about 15 minutes. You can see it's all turning yellow and white and scaly and terrible, especially around here where the worst rust is, which is good. It means it's eating the rust. And when I wipe all that off, I'll actually have a surface that's prepped and able to be epoxy primed. So that is actually the rust being eaten away and neutralized so it doesn't surface again. And I've done this before on some rusty engine parts, and 20 years later they're still not rusty. So it effectively neutralizes and sterilizes the steel. And lots of guys have been using this for years. The hot rodders know it really well, and it just works awesome. This is what an hour of vinegary goodness looks like. And the worse it looks, the better I feel, because it means it's working. So check out this. This is how the water looks after a couple minutes of scrubbing with just water. And it's already coming up really good. Here I am in the back of my Mini, where I've spent many times crawling in the back. Come with me into the TARDIS. That's what it's like really in the back of a Mini, because there's so much space actually. It's incredible for such a tiny car. Now, I'm in the back to show you my floor, which I've rubbed the whole thing with vinegar and water. And it's come up really good considering how bad it was. So I've got still little bits of paint, but what I'm in the back for is to show you a couple of little rust holes I've got. So there's one there, and the metal's actually cleaned up pretty well, but as I go around there's a couple of little spots. So yeah, there's a little one there, which is basically a scratch that's got water in it, and then it's gone rusty. But generally it's pretty good. This front section here, this is all accessible from underneath, because this is directly underneath there where the battery's stored. This area here I can actually access the underside. So what I'm thinking of doing here is using my spot weld drill, the one that has a center punch and the sort of donut shaped drill, and actually just drilling this out and then drilling out a fresh piece of metal to put in there, and then weld it in place just to seal that up, because the other option is to actually cut out this whole piece, but actually the rest of it's pretty good. It's really just this pinhole. I could try just tack welding that with the MIG welder to seal it up, but if it's rusty there, then it's going to be, if you can see pinholes, it's going to be rusty on the underside. So it's better just to cut it out, put a fresh piece in there. So that's what I'm going to do now. So there we go, I've drilled it out. This is the old underside of the old piece, which you can see the rust on, and my fresh piece of metal that I've cut a new one that's exactly the right size, and now that will go into the hole. This just fell through the hole, but yet I'll actually just use a little magnet on the side of it just to hold it in place and then weld that in. There's my new piece held in place with a light magnet, and then I'm going to tack weld it in place. Well, that didn't work because as soon as I tried to tack it in place, it blew through because there was a bigger rust spot next to it. So I decided to use a hole saw and cut out a hole and then cut out a fresh piece of metal, but it went a bit crazy. So I don't make mistakes, I just make changes to the plan. Yeah, I make mistakes. So I'm going to fix it by, I've put a fresh piece of metal behind it and put a magnet in place to hold it there, and then I'm going to basically just... So, lucky, I did put a little disclaimer at the start of this video series saying that I'm learning as I go, which is a good thing because as I tried to weld in the little spot weld patch-ups, it just blew through around the outside because there was obviously some rust there, and it just made an even bigger hole. So, I don't make mistakes, I just make alterations to my plan. What I've decided to do is I got a little jig and I used a larger metal hole saw, and I put this here to stop it from moving, and then knelt on the bit of wood to hold it down, and then drilled a hole right through, and then I cut through the section that was rusted, and then I thought what I might be able to do is just put this onto a fresh piece of metal and cut it out, but the problem is it's too thick and it gave me a much too big gap around the outside of the new piece of metal, which is basically, I ended up with this, which was actually too big to use to patch the hole. So instead what I did was I got a fresh piece of metal, put it behind, luckily I can access the bottom of the panel, put a magnet on it to hold it in place, and then I used my marker and I just drew around the hole, cut it out with a pair of snips and trimmed it until it was right, put it in place, tacked it, and then just went around and completed it. So now I'll just grind that off and it should do the job. But these other sections here, where I've got rust on the floor in here, I'm actually going to make some new patch panels for these, cut out the rust altogether, because it's just too much mucking around. So here I've got some pitting here. If I go through and do a hole saw in there, I'll still have the sides next to it that need repairing as well. So I mean, this is going to be, it's going to have a cover over it anyway, but driving around knowing there's still rust spots and stuff, I just can't deal with that after the amount of work that I've done so far. So I'm going to try to fix these new sections and we'll see how we go with that. And here's my rust hole that I've repaired. So that's pretty clean. Look, I've got so many other spots that I could replace with panels, and I've actually made a patch panel, which is somewhere here. I've made this patch panel which I can use to repair another section if I need to. Here, that can be welded in, and this I made a cardboard template and then cut it out, rounded the sides, which makes it a little bit stronger and it's a bit easier to weld. You don't get blow through. And then I just cut it out of metal and just bent it in my vise, bent it along the line and then bent it the other way, and that seemed to give me almost the same profile as the floor. So that was pretty handy. So I can make some bigger ones, might end up making a few of them. Yeah. This is my back with the back now. I've sprayed it with some rust corrosion treatment, and then I'm going to paint on some primer in several layers, epoxy primer. Some of the bits. There's the back. So again, I brushed on this primer, epoxy primer, to make it nice and thick. Give it a nice coating, and it's all dry already. So nice sunny day over here. I've also clear coated all of the hinges. So these are all stripped back to bare metal and then epoxied underneath. And then epoxy primer, and then top coat, and then clear as well, just to protect them a little bit.